important for the production, the ATP production in carbohydrate metabolism. So that is the issue with these terrible cases of acidosis in thiamine deficient patients who go on glucose infusions, for example. I guess all of you have seen this, where you get unexpected and really treatment-resistant acidosis. You need to consider thiamine there without testing, so give a high dose of thiamine in such cases. Foods, again, there's a variety of foods that contain thiamine. Often it's fortified foods, and that depends on your country. So maybe you check if your country supplements thiamine to be aware if there is a greater percentage to be expected within your community who has a thiamine problem. And so here we have the carbohydrate metabolism, also, of course, the nervous system. And our recommendation here, again, in Austria it's quite hard, if not impossible, in clinical routine to get thiamine testing in the blood. But if you can get it, it's of course worthwhile. And again here, the patients who are on prolonged medical nutrition need to be really aware of this micronutrient, and of course the post-bariatric surgery patients. In the intensive care or emergency setting, we recommend to give a high dose of thiamine, multiple RDAs, without any hesitation, not waiting for testing results, because we know there's low acute toxicity, and of course there's much to gain. And if you just wait until you find out if you can get thiamine testing or not, most of the acute illness will already have evolved. So there's not much time in the first days of such a patient. Otherwise, the recommended doses are much smaller. So for mild deficiency for outpatients, we recommend 10 milligrams per week, followed by 3 to 5 milligrams daily. For chronic diuretic therapy, that's also maybe not in everybody's head. That's also a suggestion because the needs appear to be higher. And in these clinical, really bad situations, we recommend a very high dose, just for a very short period of time. Again, also in refeeding syndrome. And also some of the dialysis patients, also they have increased losses and require higher doses than usual. Going to folate, so B9, folic acid, is of course a key player in cell growth, in the gestational stage, in the development, and the data are really, really good for folate supplementation before having a baby and during pregnancy to reduce spine malformations. But still, I'm always really a little bit shocked and surprised how many of my patients really wanting to become pregnant, they have never heard of folic acid. And their gynecologist has never told them, their GP has never told them. So I don't know, implementation science. The data is really, really, really strong. It's not so difficult, it's not toxic, it's not expensive at all. But and also I have a selected group of patients who come to see me, so I would estimate that at least 50% of women aiming to become pregnant don't take folate, which is a big opportunity, and it's really easy if you want. But also, outside of the pregnancy situation, there are many patients who are have a folate deficiency, and that's probably to do with the sources. So it's largely the green leafy vegetables, but again, also fortified foods. There are many fortified foods in many countries, but not all. So you need to be aware of your local environment and counsel patients accordingly. But the majority of my patients who are folate deficient, they hardly ever see or let alone eat any vegetables. And then, of course, I give them a folate supplement, that's often patients who just have folate deficiency, and that's often the weight loss patients. And of course, it would be, in an ideal world, they go on and eat 500 grams of vegetables and 300 grams of green leafy vegetables every day for the rest of their life, but it's really not so realistic that they will do this. So, in the meanwhile, they get a folic acid supplement. And that is, for once, a test that is, I hope, I guess, covered by most insurance companies, and there's no reason not to do this, at least at the beginning, if you see a patient in these settings. And of course, also as pointed out, there is this interplay for anemia, for iron replacement. So if you give high-dose iron to a patient and they are folic acid deficient, that's a problem. And also if they have a B12 deficiency. So in case of doubt, it's probably, I'm not aware of many studies really, but usually if I give a patient IV high-dose iron, I also give them a course of folate and B12 for 2 to 3 months, just in case, to provide all the micronutrients and sometimes copper for the anemia to resolve, or for the iron deficiency to resolve. When should you measure? Of course, with macrocytic anemia. So as you saw before, the patient before also did have macrocytosis, not anemia, but macrocytosis. And also please repeat within 3 months after supplementation, approximately. And of course, where you know there is an increased need for folate, you can measure it more often. So rheumatic patients, for example, on certain drugs, they have a very high folate requirement that usually works well, but sometimes not. And yeah, that's details on what you should measure. In enteral and parental nutrition, we also recommend the same 300 to 400 micrograms per day, and the same holds true for the parental nutrition of 400 to 600 micrograms per day. B12, similar, same, but not equal. It's mostly animal products. So, of course, vegan diets are usually deficient in B12. There are selected fermented foods that contain a little bit of B12, but generally vegans and also vegetarians have a higher risk for B12 deficiency, but usually they know, yeah? As opposed to omnivores who think, oh, I eat everything, it's all good. Not many omnivores really eat everything. And also, just today I tried something that's really funny. If you give a photo of what you eat to ChatGPT and let it estimate what you just had, it works quite well. Yeah, so it's like identifies quite well what you had, identifies what is in there, what might be deficient. So today at the hotel buffet, I had a very large, very nice breakfast. And ChatGPT said, well, there's not much calcium in there. And so I got a yogurt. But it's, I think for the younger patients who are a little bit, know how to do these things, it can be a very easy method to get a feedback without paying too much. Yeah? Of course, B12, we need it also for the brain, for the nerves. There's also really good data. B12 deficiency is really frequent, also in omnivores. 10 to 20, 40% in nursing homes sometimes, so especially patients with diabetes, polyneuropathy are candidates for B12 deficiency. And you know, sometimes you can also in the low, also something that is usually covered by the insurance if you test it, and if you have a B12 level in the lower range of normal, you could test and see if the symptoms also balance, for example, is sometimes an issue with these polyneuropathy patients. You could try if that makes the symptoms better. What should you measure? So, of course, you could do a whole TC and MMA, and also, of course, these patients with autoimmune disease, with really symptoms that are indicative of B12 deficiency. We should also go for testing and screen them for pernicious anemia, because that is still, it's rare, but it can still be a deadly disease and it's unnecessary. So that should be tested, and of course you should test for intrinsic factor in these patients to get the autoimmune component. How much should we give in enteral and parental nutrition? So 2.5 micrograms in enteral nutrition. In case of deficiency, sometimes we need much more for a while to load patients, but in the end, the 2.5 would be the daily allowance, the daily recommendation, and the parental nutrition should have at least 5 micrograms. So usually the products that we use, they're quite good in the meanwhile and have these numbers. Of course, also breastfeeding mothers, it's the same. Also for iron, there's higher needs, and they should get cobalamin daily, ideally. And also, of course, there are patients who have resorption problems, and that's also patients on metformin in 30% of the time. They develop B12 deficiency because the active resorption is impaired. And they should get either a high dose daily oral supplement. So in Austria, we have now, in Germany, we have now a 1000 microgram supplement that is really doing the trick for most. And if that's not possible, you can get the IM injections, parenteral injections, every few months. Vitamin C. Vitamin C, of course, we're going into flu season, yeah? And yeah, still much controversy, much research being done. In reality, there are not so many patients who really have vitamin C deficiency, because even if you just eat half a pepper a day, that's your vitamin C need for the day. But as previously said, some patients don't do that. And that's a problem, because we need vitamin C indeed for many functions, for collagen. Collagen is also very popular nowadays. We also need it for radical, to protect the cells against the free radicals. We need it for our immune system, of course, and also for the health of our brains. What should we measure? In Austria, we cannot measure it, but well, we can in the meanwhile, but it's still a little bit complicated. It's a bit delicate for the pre-analytical side of things. So please check if you can measure it. If you can, it's certainly good. And if not, we need to stay with clinical suspicion. Also, scurvy is still an issue and is also becoming an issue in some populations more than it used to be. So how much should we have in the enteral nutrition? 100 milligrams, and in the parenteral nutrition also 100 to 200 milligrams. So I think yeah, so I really see them back. So we have now some data, recent data, that especially in children with malnutrition who don't have access to enough fruits and vegetables, there is really also children who have a very restricted diet, so sometimes psychiatric disease, again, who eat very, very monotonously. There are problems with many micronutrients, but especially also vitamin C. And yeah, we don't look patients in the mouth as much as we maybe should, yeah? And that would be a very typical sign of vitamin C deficiency. If you see that, please start supplementing and get testing if possible. So the corkscrew hairs are really interesting. And that's a very new analysis you see in the Lancet this year. And the incidence is still low, but the incidence of scurvy in children, hospitalized children, is really increasing in the post-COVID era. We hope it gets back down again, but it's quite a social problem as well for the nutrition of these children. So vitamin D is a few minutes left. So of course vitamin D deficiency is also very, very frequent, very dependent on the region, on the season. So now is usually the time when we have the best vitamin D levels. Of course, we need it for bones, we need it for muscles, for immune system, and also there are really interesting data in the last years on also diabetes and glucose metabolism with vitamin D. So a small effect, but a consistent effect. What are recommendations? Vitamin D status may be determined if all patients considered at risk. And we should measure 25 hydroxyvitamin D. Don't measure 125, it's much more expensive and not necessary. And maybe that's also an important recommendation. So for some patients who have recurrent deficiency and are not able to increase their levels to a good value, they need much more, of 4,000, 5,000, sometimes even more maybe. And they should be checked again for efficacy, but also safety, of course, because again, there is always this fear of vitamin D intoxication, and of course it exists, but it's quite rare. Yeah? And the same holds true, so rickets is also something that we still see the pediatricians that really have an eye for that, they see it more, especially in refugees, where vitamin D is just not on the top 10 priority list of their lives. Yeah? And that's really sad because it's really easily preventable. And of course, you can imagine that feet like this, that's also not reversible, except for really very complicated orthopedic surgery and disability for many, many months in the best case. So also here, new data on rickets, it's unfortunately not gone, not a thing of the past. And here in Germany, we have quite actual data 10 years ago, so 60% of the normal population are vitamin D deficient and 30% have severe vitamin D deficiency. And again, you can argue what is deficiency, but the severe deficiency is really undebatable, so below 12 nanograms or 30 nanomoles, there is a very increased risk for rickets and other skeletal problems, so that is something to be avoided for sure. And the Endocrine Society last year for prevention of disease, as opposed to the 2011 guideline, here also recommended vitamin D for all below, in a higher doses than with IVA until now, for all patients below the age of 18 for rickets, all patients above the age of 75, all patients with prediabetes, and all pregnant patients. And that's about half the population, if you sum this up, yeah? So no time to go into this. That's the new recommendation from the Endocrine Society last year. You may want to look into this because it's very well based. That is the 4 target groups. And so a few of the last slides to sum up. As also said by Mette before, the analysis in inflammation can be a problem, so please always do a C-reactive protein. If there is substantial inflammation going on, it's hard to interpret micronutrient status that we've seen before, and that is really something to be aware of. So, that is also in the interest of time. So, the monitoring during parenteral and enteral nutrition, before and during parenteral nutrition, it's so expensive already, so if there is any argument against the costs of doing this, it's really ridiculous, because that's a therapy that is so expensive already. To add this and do a targeted approach in the year 2025 is really not too much to ask, we believe. So in the end, key messages: we have deficiencies of many of these vitamins that are really highly prevalent, even in healthy subjects, even in omnivores. And of course, it's more a problem in patients with chronic disease. Vitamins as trace elements are an essential part of any form of nutrition, and they should never be omitted from enteral and parenteral nutrition. The requirements are often greater, and the inflammatory response can be an issue in interpreting the status. So some vitamins have specific markers that are available or not, so that's something to be aware of. And there we are at the end. Thank you.